I need the kind of planning in life that Bollywood star Akshay Kumar has. He let go of his Canadian citizenship in August, and in September, India, well, has banned Canadians from coming over. It all started when India was asleep, both literally because of the time difference and figuratively, when Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau dropped this bombshell on the floor of his parliament.
Canadian security agencies have been actively pursuing credible allegations of a potential link between agents of the government of India and the killing of a Canadian citizen, Hardeep Singh Nijjar.
Credible allegations of potential link. These words are so very carefully chosen. This is the English version of Daal, kuch, kaala. Now, whether these allegations were credible or incredible, Canada thought that it was enough for them to throw out one of our diplomats from the intelligence wing. At the heart of this controversy is the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, who India, of course, regards as a Khalistani terrorist, but the Western media seems to curiously paint as some kind of peace-loving Sikh leader, conveniently forgetting that he was on the Interpol's Red Corner list and also became a Canadian citizen in a very shady manner and after being rejected by their own agencies multiple times. So this video talks about three things. One, what's going on? Two, what does this mean for India? And three, and very importantly, the economic and geopolitical gameplay behind the scenes. But first things first, what's going on? Now, like a bad marriage, before the divorce comes a lot of fights. In the case of India and Canada, Canada had routinely ignored India's request to rein in Khalistan extremism, even when it was linked to crime in India or threats against our diplomatic staff or drugs or human trafficking. So when Prime Minister Trudeau gets up in front of a mic and lectures about how Canada is all about the rule of law, India is like, can you believe this guy? Trudeau's own coalition partner Jagmeet Singh is said to be a Khalistan sympathizer. And obviously it frustrates India that a movement that hardly has any traction domestically is being given so much of a free run abroad. Because remember, it's not just Canada. These guys have a strong lobbying force in the US, UK, Australia, and Canada is like, well, they're just protesting. That's free speech in my country.
Canada will always defend freedom of expression, freedom of conscience, freedom of peaceful protest.
And India is like, array, but their free speech is to destroy me. That's not free speech, that's free hate. India's legitimate fear is that, like, those movies where ghosts and mummies are there and then some people get around in a circle and keep chanting some old scriptures, and before you know, some ghost pops up and starts killing all the extras in the movie. That's what concerns India on this whole Khalistan issue. And the reason that India's trust in Canada has eroded over the years is that it had flat out refused to accept Sikh extremism as an issue, even when India had provided evidence or identified people and organizations that were pursuing criminal activity. And probably all of this because of vote bank compulsions. So bad has been the appeasement that back in 2018, when Prime Minister Trudeau and his plane full of Sherwani costumes arrived in India, in an official reception, Canada had no problem in inviting Jaspal Atwal, a guy convicted in Canada of attempting to assassinate a Punjab minister who was visiting at the time. It's only when India raised a stink that his invitation was cancelled. So this is the level of frustration that India has had to deal with in its regular diplomatic interactions with Canada. So imagine the level of peak gaslighting India felt when Canada got up and said, actually, India, you are the one interfering in my country. Now, Canada's allegation is that agents of the Indian government were probably involved in the murder of Hardeep Nijjar. And to be fair, before Prime Minister Trudeau explosively spoke up in the parliament, Canada has been trying to bring this up with India behind the scenes. Evidently, Canada had sent its national security advisor to India. Prime Minister Trudeau tried raising it with Prime Minister Modi during the G20 meet. He even managed to get US President Biden to reportedly raise it with Prime Minister Modi in bilateral discussions. And look, as of now, no one quite knows the truth. Does India have a death squad sitting in Canada, or has the Indian government been falsely implicated by possible Khalistan sympathizers in the Canadian system? Who knows? But it also seems that Canada too doesn't have the full picture. Look, there are reports that one of Canada's Five Eyes partners, so US, UK, Australia, New Zealand, one of them essentially tipped off Canada, and that there has been surveillance evidence implicating Indian diplomats and officials. But I guess that for Canada to convert this to hard evidence, it essentially needs India's cooperation.
And we are there to work constructively with India. And we hope that they engage with us so that we can get to the bottom of this very serious matter.
Look at the strategic wording of Trudeau's statements. Not that India did the crime, but saying that I call upon India to join the investigation and clear up its name or own up to it. And this is because behind closed doors, Trudeau wasn't getting anywhere in trying to engage with India on this. So now their broad strategy seems to be that if we publicly name and shame India, then to contain the reputational damage, to assure other Western powers that it is actually a friendly country that doesn't threaten their citizens, India will come forward and help us with the investigation. Clearly, whatever India the Canadians must be imagining is not the India that we are. So India has come back hard. It expelled a Canadian intelligence diplomat in a tit-for-tat fashion, has asked them to reduce their diplomatic presence in India, has warned Indians from going to Canada, and then the ultimate step, suspended visa operations in Canada, which is now going to be a big problem for the Indian diaspora there. But in all of this, have you noticed something? Trudeau is going on, but for such a huge allegation being made by the leader of one of the world's major powers, Prime Minister Modi hasn't responded. Even Foreign Minister Jaishankar hasn't responded. Instead, India has wheeled out its Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson Arindam Bagchi to respond.
Any country that needs to look at this, I think it is Canada and its growing reputation as a place, as a safe haven for terrorists, for extremists, and for organized crime. And I think that's a country that needs to worry about its international reputation.
It's almost as if India is trying to send a message to Canada that, look, we think that your Prime Minister is so immature that forget our PM, even our Foreign Minister doesn't care to respond to him. And look, I mean, Canada must also understand that diplomacy is ultimately the art of saying the unsaid. Even India and Pakistan don't name the diplomats that they want removed from their countries. All of this is done very quietly behind closed doors. To get up and publicly say all what Canada has said against a supposed friendly country basically means that you no longer wish to be friends. And so India is responding accordingly. But let's not pretend that India is not getting impacted by all of this. Being told off by Western powers like the US and Australia, who, by the way, have made appropriate noises to support Canada in all of this, is the last thing India would have liked to deal with after claiming a diplomatic win at the G20 summit as an emerging global power. India is, after all, lobbying for a seat at the Security Council, is positioning itself as the leader of the global south, that is the leader of less developed countries. So India needs to project that it adheres to the rules-based frameworks. It doesn't help that this impression is now being made as if India is some kind of rogue nation. India also imports a bunch of important things from Canada. Masood Daal, for instance. And this is really important at this stage because pulses inflation is picking up in India, and sowing this year for pulses has been really bad because of poor rains. So India is looking to import more pulses. And also, let's not forget, Canada is very resource rich. India relies on it for fertilizer and energy products. In fact, even on the day when Trudeau made these allegations, a Canadian delegation led by the Premier of the Yukon Territory in Canada was meeting with our Union Minister of Coal and Mines to discuss the access of critical minerals that India needs for its economic development. Not to mention, that Canadian investors have poured in billions of dollars in our stock markets, in our debt markets. Key sectors like infrastructure, energy, fintech are all using Canadian money. We also get millions of dollars of remittances from our diaspora there. India also exports pharma, consumer goods, a bunch of industrial goods to Canada. So, as much as India is acting all outraged over Canada, it is also not in India's interest to rock this boat too much. After all, how would India get Canadian investment if it stops giving visa to these investors? But on a more medium term basis, it does seem that Canada has probably taken on a much bigger risk by taking on India. Like most Western powers, Canada already has a complicated relationship with China. And for the West, India is emerging as a natural counterweight to China. After all, the enemy of an enemy is a friend, which is why India has become this supposed darling of the West. The West actually wants India to succeed as an economic and strategic counterweight to China. India has a very influential, well-educated diaspora. It is going through a digital revolution. It is building infrastructure massively. It's finally taking industrialization seriously to the extent of even providing subsidies to foreign companies to make in India. And let's not forget, we have an expanding, highly aspirational middle class with a huge willingness to spend. I mean, iPhone 15 was launched in India, and on the opening day, there has been queues for hours in the two official stores in India, in Mumbai and Delhi.
मैं कल दोपहर से आया हूँ 3 बजे से 17 घंटे लाइन में रुका फर्स्ट आईफोन लेने के लिए इंडिया के पहले एप्पल स्टोर से और मैं खास अहमदाबाद से आया हूँ.
So this is the craze in India for arguably one of the most expensive phones in the world. And for foreign companies, this market comes packaged in a broadly democratic environment with stable political transitions and decently strong institutions. Which is why so many Western countries are keen to sign trade deals with India. It's like investing in a startup. The market for their exports and investments could multiply by several times in the next few decades if India plays its cards right. And so by antagonizing India as well as China, Canada has successfully alienated itself from around 1/3 of the global population. It has already self-sabotaged the trade deal negotiations with India at a time when all its other Western peers are in fact running to conclude these deals with India. And it's done this at a time when its own economy, when Canada's own economy is struggling with slowing growth, a cost of living crisis, a housing crisis.
How the hell is anyone existing in Canada? Like, I feel trapped. And like I just got a good job. I started in September, but even with that job, it pays less than 40 grand a year. And it's a job that requires like education, and even on that job, like, I still can't do shit. I can't buy anything. I can't afford the rent these days. Like,
and let's not forget, Indian students make up for around 40% or so of overseas students in Canada. Effectively, the high fees that they are paying are subsidizing education for Canadian students. Besides also adding to their labor force, India is after all one of the top providers of labor to Canada. But one final point. A key reason why India hasn't faced a large global backlash is essentially because of our economic potential. But that is ultimately a commercial and strategic decision on the part of other countries. See, even despite all of this, US is still publicly backing Canada, telling India, please cooperate with them.
From our perspective, it is critical that the Canadian investigation proceed, and it would be important that India work with the Canadians on this investigation. We want to see accountability.
And so, President Biden and Prime Minister Modi can shake hands, tell jokes, hug on and on, but push comes to shove, the Western powers still are keen to back each other up, which is why India puts such a high premium on its Russia relationship. So India can't and shouldn't take its international stature for granted. And economic management is at the heart of it all. ensure high quality growth, generate jobs, lift people out of poverty, continue with reforms, keep inflation under control, build infrastructure, and very importantly, strengthen institutions. Things like democratic values, rule of law, a fair place to do business. They might sound vague, but they take years to build and days to destroy, and they matter for India's economic clout. Because if India starts to lose its economic clout, then this political clout will also be at risk. For more such insights, please like, share, and subscribe to The Bond Economist.